And we're live here on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. What is up, guys? Happy Monday. Nick Script here on the P2W Fantasy Podcast, doing a solo mailbag episode, which I always like to do. I like to mix that in, on top of hosting some other guests. But my daughter's daycare was off today, so I took a vacation day. We're hanging out all day, and she's down for a nap. So I figured instead of just watching some TV, jump on the mailbag episode. I have a bunch of questions from the community, which I really appreciate, and some interesting topics to talk about here today. Before we jump into that show, as always, this podcast is partnered up with the Fantasy Points Media Group. Go check out fantasypoints.com. One-stop shop for all your fantasy football related needs, whether you are looking at DFS, redraft, dynasty, rankings, projections. It's all in one spot at fantasypoints.com. So mailbag episode, excited about that. If you are tuning in, stick with me here.
Play to win, no fear to give. I feel but I can't forgive. I go all in this time, yeah, I won't regret. I'll pick the best on trip, they don't understand. I play to win, yeah, I play to win, I play to win. Yeah, I play to win, I play to win. Oh, play to win, I play to win. Yeah, play to win, I play to win.
All right, if you are tuning in, solo show, mailbag episode. I like to do some solo shows from time to time just to talk too much, and then I'll host on some other ones to let some other people actually talk. But interesting questions today from the community. I'm just going to put them on the bottom of the screen there and go one by one. So at Coach Craig Sport, he asks, favorite wide receiver sleeper prospect, and then he puts in parentheses, late day 3. So we're looking at a guy that might go later in the third round. So talking about third round, wide receivers typically mean guys that are dart throws, right? So I had a couple guys that I juggled around and I thought about, but the guy I think is pretty interesting is Khalil Shakir, Boise State. So Khalil Shakir, 6 foot, 196 senior out of Boise State. He ran a 4.43 coming out of high school. He was a great recruit. A lot of people comment on his playmaking abilities with the ball in his hands. I actually was looking at his NFL.com prospect profile, and they labeled him as a menace with the ball in his hands. So that's typical of him. People speak highly of his character and the type of person he is, which you can say only goes so far, but can actually mean something to an organization. 77 receptions for 1,117 receiving yards plus 7 touchdowns in his last season at Boise State. 21 carries as well for 130 rushing yards. So dart throw, talking about, wide receivers on day 3. I think the depth chart, wherever he lands, is going to be important to see what sort of role he can maybe inch his way into. But talking about a guy who's, electric with the ball in his hands, people speak highly of. He was a great recruit, decent athlete, can also run the ball a little bit. I think Khalil Shakir is interesting to me. We got guys, Nate Williams in the chat here. My brother, much love. Appreciate it. If you guys want to comment, I'll throw it on the screen. Can only show the comments, though, on Facebook and YouTube because Twitter doesn't let you still. All right, next question here. Got Santos, at Got Santos, asks, what would you sell T-Law for in Dynasty Superflex? So by T-Law, they mean rookie from this past season, Trevor Lawrence, and then Superflex being leagues where you can start 2 quarterbacks. So the value of quarterbacks is a bit higher. So, there's a lot of hype for Trey Lance. So I wouldn't say you can get, Trevor Lawrence, you can sell him for Trey Lance plus something. I do think that you still have the ability for Justin Fields to get Fields plus something, potentially, depending on the league you play in, for Trevor Lawrence. I'm in a league with a guy who has Trevor Lawrence who still is very, very high on him, and I'm in some other leagues where I've seen Trevor Lawrence get dealt because people didn't like what they seen out of his rookie season. Russell Wilson's interesting if you're more of a contender and you're like, hey, Trevor Lawrence, good young quarterback, but I think Wilson will make me more competitive. Can I pivot to him, especially if people are nervous about him being 33, which is not terrible for a quarterback. If I'm loaded at quarterback, though, I think I target the manager who really needs a quarterback in Superflex leagues because, in my opinion, in the leagues that I play in, it's easier said than done to go and trade for quarterbacks. So if you can target a team that is in need of a quarterback and you say, hey, Lawrence is like my third or fourth guy. Maybe he's my third guy, and I have somebody of some stability that doesn't kill my team for dealing Trevor Lawrence. Then I have some leeway to deal him off. Can I go out and get a stud wide receiver, a young guy like a DK Metcalf who has some questionable outlooks on him, in terms of what the community is looking at, or can I go and get like a Mark Andrews and really complete my team in this dynasty superflex? We can go into how I feel about Trevor Lawrence, but I feel like if you are in that position where you're like, hey, you know what, it's time for me to adjust my team, and he's the guy I want to trade away. I think again, I might target the manager who really needs a quarterback in your super flex, and then go after a guy that's really going to be a staple in your starting lineup on a weekly basis, especially if they're a little bit more down on a player than you might be. Oh, I got tons of people in the comments. My guy Dan Brown, what's good, my guy? Got the Sons of Dynasty. Shout out to Sons of Dynasty. I got a hat sitting in the corner over there. Great group of guys. We collaborated on an article, and I really respect what they're doing. Elon will fix the Twitter issue. That's a possibility for sure. Especially if he gets that deal done. Next one, at the FF Buffalo. This is a tough question. He asks, order the following quarterbacks for redraft and dynasty. And he says, Dakiri Prescott, so Dak Prescott, Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, and Matthew Stafford. So we can spend a lot of time on this question, but we got a bunch, so I want to keep things rolling. And I feel like we'll focus on this one in a dynasty aspect versus redraft. Redraft, it might be pretty tight with all these guys. The only guy that I have major question marks is still Aaron Rodgers, who we regard as a high valued quarterback, but is in a weird situation right now with not really having anybody in that system. Well, let's look at dynasty for these guys. And I think you can argue that all of these guys listed, Prescott, Wilson, Rodgers, Stafford, might be in the same tier of quarterbacks in dynasty. Maybe you say it's different, but for me, I look at Dak, who's 28. He's a bit younger than the rest of this group. He averaged 19.92 fantasy points this past season, so not as high as some of these other guys. But Dak, he's got a younger core: CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup when he's back, Dalton Schultz. I think I have him as the one of this group. But again, I'm not going to sit here and argue if somebody says, well, it should be Wilson or it should be Stafford. But I'll put Dak there just because I feel like he's still in a good system to make him successful. He's a bit younger than these other guys. There is some passing upside for him in Dallas. And then number two, I really juggled between Russell Wilson and Matthew Stafford. I think I would say Matthew Stafford in redraft. I might go Russell Wilson in dynasty, though, by a hair. If you said, where do you rank these guys? I probably have them like neck and neck. But Russ this past season averaged 17.22 fantasy points. He had a lot of down games this year. The one thing I want to comment on is that he's never attempted over 558 passing attempts in a season. And this past season, they were not attempting a lot of passes under Pete Carroll's system. I wonder if they do, let Russ cook in Denver. To me, it'll be interesting. He does have a younger core in comparison to Matthew Stafford, so maybe that's what kind of pushes me in the dynasty perspective of more Russell Wilson over Matthew Stafford. But again, you can argue it. But Javonte Williams at running back, you had Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, KJ Hamler's another young guy. Tim Patrick will be involved. Albert O at tight end, a young core. So he's moving from a DK and a Lockett, which we might have more of a solidified view of. And then shifts over to this younger core. But I think that might be the separator for him in dynasty. And I'm hoping that Denver lets him throw the ball. I know they like to run the ball a lot too. O-line's a bit better. They have a defense that's can supplement the offense. So I'm going to lean Russ over Stafford. I think it's super close, though. It's probably a coin flip. I'll take Stafford likely in redraft because of Cooper Kupp, and now he's got Allen Robinson. But I'll put Stafford after Russ. I still think he's going to be a stud. He this past season averaged 20.45 fantasy points, so he was solid. I think this year, again, with Cooper Kupp, I don't think much is going to change. I think Allen Robinson's probably going to take a step in a better direction than he did this last year in Chicago. And then I have Rodgers at the bottom of the list. And I'm not being a Packer hater as a Bears fan or anything like that, but it has to do with him losing Devontae Adams in his current duo being Allen Lazard and Sammy Watkins. I think maybe Amari Rodgers pops up and has some sort of relevance. I do think the Packers will address the wide receiver position in this coming draft. So I doubt that his 1 and 2 is going to end up being Allen Lazard and Sammy Watkins. But I think that's what pushes him to the bottom of this list of guys, just because, he was solid this last year in fantasy. He was the MVP again, 21.47 fantasy points. But my big question marks, I'm looking at these other guys and seeing who they have to throw to. And then I look at Aaron Rodgers and see, I'm seeing who he has to throw to. And he's the oldest of the group. So I'll put him at the bottom, but still you can argue the tiers there. At the boys _22, who I've talked to once or twice in the community. He asked Travis Etienne or Saquon Barkley. And for this one, I'll probably have a lot of people that end up disagreeing with me on this. But I think Travis Etienne has the opportunity now that James Robinson is going to be dealing with the recovery process of an Achilles injury. He has the opportunity to be a pass-catching running back, which we know is huge for fantasy. And everything I talk about on this podcast is PPR related. But Etienne has the opportunity to, step into a role where he's going to get some solidified touches with a quarterback that he has a lot of experience with, since they were both at Clemson together and have a good relationship. But Etienne's definitely interesting. Looking at keep, trade, cut. I don't like going off of trade calculators, but I like to look at that because it gives like the community perspective on things. They had Etienne at 4,824 in his value, and then Barkley at 4,865. So pretty close. They label it as a fair trade, and they just give you like a number value for each player. Again, don't live and die by it, but I like to look at the perspectives of the community. And looking at Barkley, weeks 2 and 3, he was a RB2 overall. It's a small sample size. He averaged 25.5 fantasy points. He had 11 catches, 2 rushing touchdowns during those 2 weeks. I thought to myself, I'm like, all right, this is the Barkley we know. Maybe he's back to being the type of guy that you are comfortable every week having in your fantasy lineup. He was coming straight from an ACL injury, and then what happened this past season? An ankle injury. So the guy's been banged up. A lot of people feel, pretty conflicted about him. I've seen some people say that he's lost a step. I don't know if I want to go that far. I think he's a guy that's been recovering from injuries. I think he's a guy that's in not the best system in New York. We saw his rookie year, 91 receptions. He his first 2 seasons, over 1,000 yards rushing, 4.5 yards per attempt for his career. I think I'm going to lean Barkley here, and a lot of people would say, no, I want the young guy who's, with his quarterback and in a promising role in Jacksonville versus Barkley, who's been in these trade rumors and this and that. But I've just seen Barkley at an NFL level perform to an elite level, and I know a lot of people are out on him, and his value's kind of all over the place right now. But I'm going to lean Barkley in this one just because I've seen a lot of good Saquon Barkley in the NFL, and I'm just hoping that this Giants system continues to build itself to enable him to be successful. And they've added some people in the draft, as far as like Kadarius Toney, and it seems like they're trying to address the O-line. And I know he's been in some rumors, but I still believe in Barkley, and I feel like the further he gets away from that ACL injury, the better we're going to see his production and what he once was. At Jacobo _Moses asks, Dynasty PPR 14 team. So 14 teams, a little bit different because the rosters are thinner. The waiver wire is thinner. You got guys in your lineups that are not is solidified as guys in a 10 or 12 team where you're comfortable with plugging him in every week. But he asked Deebo Samuel and DP Jones. So that's Donovan Peoples-Jones. So Deebo being from the 49ers, Donovan Peoples-Jones being from the Cleveland Browns, or Elijah Moore and Mooney. And I think with trades like this, you kind of got to break it down to look at the individual pieces, the pairings, who's the best in the deal, what does your team look like after the deal. But looking at this trade, I'm sure most people would say Deebo Samuel is the most valuable piece in the trade. And then on that side, he also has Donovan Peoples-Jones, who week 6, 9, and 14 had 101, 86, and 90 receiving yards. So he had some big receiving days. Kind of dart throw, though. I mean, it was nothing you can really predict. He was a risky flex with some upside. He has a nice opportunity in 2021 because as of right now, it looks like it's Amari Cooper and Donovan Peoples-Jones. Maybe people say it's Anthony Schwartz. Maybe Landry finds a way to come back. I'm not sure there, but he has an opportunity. And then on the other side of the ball, I speak about Elijah Moore too much on this podcast, but I think I had him as like the wide receiver 15 or around there in my dynasty rankings before. Elijah Moore being a guy who performed with multiple quarterbacks, multiple Jets quarterbacks. His rookie season had some phenomenal weeks. Darnell Mooney, no bias, no Bears homerism here, but Mooney has the opportunity as of right now today to be, again, the most targeted player in the Chicago Bears offense. They haven't really added anybody of value to the system. I think, and I hope they address their wide receiver room in the draft and go after somebody. But Darnell Mooney was a guy last season, had 4 games of 120 plus receiving yards, had a lot of high targeted games. And I'm going to lean the Elijah Moore in the Darnell Mooney side because I feel like in a 14 team, these are 2 solidified starting pieces. These are 2 guys as of right now are the wide receiver ones for their team. And I know Deebo Samuel was awesome. He was phenomenal. This past year, he's going to be used in a similar way in the Kyle Shanahan system as both a receiver and a rusher. But again, 14 team, more players are trying to shift this. More players have to be started that you normally wouldn't. And knowing that Elijah Moore and Darnell Mooney would be solidified every week starters for a 14 team team. I'm leaning that side. And I feel like both guys can have high target volumes. Both guys can have high receiving days. So, again, deeper league, even in a 12 team, I think I'd still lean that just because we're looking at 2 guys that are the wide receiver ones on their team. At Noah Wright asks, who do you think is the most underrated wide receiver in Dynasty approaching this season based on either ADP or personal sentiment? So, I say it all the time, and I won't get too deep into it, but I'll say Brandon Cooks. Every year he's underrated. Every year his ADP is nowhere near what it should be. I made a board session last year where he was the wide receiver 39, and I was like pounding the board saying it doesn't make sense, and it didn't make sense because, again, he was putting up numbers that made him a start every single week for your fantasy team. I think he finished like wide receiver 17. He's had a history of great fantasy finishes on multiple different teams. He was in New England. He was with the Saints before, Houston. He's been a guy that's been in different situations with different quarterbacks, different environments, and still produce for fantasy. So if you looked at his ADP right now, I'm sure it's, again, nowhere near what it should be. The Texans extended him, and you might say, well, things were just so much better when it was with Deshaun Watson. But look at the games he had with Davis Mills this past season, and then rethink that statement because he actually had a lot of good games with Davis Mills. So again, Brandon Cooks, year in and year out, is underrated. And until he sees a decline in his play, I want him on my team every single year, redraft and dynasty. And I know he's not the youngest of wide receivers, but again, the value you get of him to where he goes in drafts is silly at times. At P-Win Dynasty asks, Chase Claypool, ? Still have hope or is he washed? So Claypool's never really been a guy, in all honesty, that I've been like super in on. I think his value was inflated a little bit after his rookie season in 2020 because he had the 9 touchdowns. He had a decent fantasy finish. Only 9 guys had more receiving touchdowns than Claypool in his rookie season. And he finished well for fantasy. He had some big games. I think his price went up at that time, and now I feel like his price is leveled out a bit. 14 games in 2021, looking at weeks 1 through 17, he was the wide receiver 41 overall, so pretty disappointing. He averaged 10.6 PPR fantasy points, and there was times where the system was without Juju Smith-Schuster, and he was being outperformed in fantasy by like the tight end, Pat Freiermuth. Or he had days where he was behind Najee in targets, and he ended up finishing with 11 more targets than Najee, which is a running back, but 64 less than Deontay Johnson. And now Mitch is in town. Could he utilize Claypool's skill set more than Big Ben did? TBD. It's up in the air. But we're looking at a 23-year-old wide receiver still developing. In Dynasty, where does he rank? I don't know, somewhere between maybe 32 and 40 overall. I think his price has dropped a bit. I'd still take guys like who I mentioned earlier, Darnell Mooney. I'll still take Darnell Mooney over Chase Claypool. I'll still take Hollywood Brown over Chase Claypool, who seem to be close to him in Dynasty rankings. But you might say, hey, I'll take the 23-year-old Chase Claypool over a guy like Tyler Lockett, or maybe over a guy like Hunter Renfrow, who might be buried in targets now with Devontae Adams and Darren Waller in that system. So for me, Chase Claypool, I'm not going to be out on a guy that's 23, who's got a new quarterback and might have the bigger games where he can have a higher receiving day and have a game where he scores a big touchdown. For me, more of a best ball target, in all honesty. Mid-second, if somebody's out, I'm in. If somebody says I'll sell Chase Claypool right now for the 205, I'm in. I'll take that chance for him to be a flex play on a given week where I have someone banged up or somebody on a bye. Again, more of a best ball play for me. But again, depending on the price of him in your specific dynasty league, which is different than mine and the guy over here and the guy over there. But a mid-second, if somebody wants to give up Chase Claypool, I'm in to give that mid-second for him. At KM Quarter asks, Ravens at pick 14, who should they draft? So I try to look at, everybody wants to talk offense and everybody wants to talk about, adding weapons and things for fantasy. But for this, I looked at some drafts, and the guy I kept seeing all the time to the Ravens was George Kalafdis, who's an edge rusher from Purdue. That's who I've seen the most. He's a 6'4", 266 edge. Calais Campbell, he's getting up there in age. He's pretty old. This guy, Kalafdis, may not be super fast, but he has a lot of power. He's got good technique. I feel like that can be a position the Ravens, add to their team to bulk up their defense a little bit more. We know that their offense with Lamar and J.K. Dobbins and Marquise Brown and Rashad Bateman and Mark Andrews and some of the other guys I haven't even mentioned is solid. So to add more pieces on defense would be important for them, I think, to be more competitive in the coming year. Another guy I saw was Jermaine Johnson, 6'5", 254 edge rusher, again from Florida State. He had a good season following his transfer from Georgia. His Senior Bowl was solid. His workouts have been good. So he's another edge rusher that they might take a look at. So for the most part, I'm seeing edge rushers. It's a class that's deep at that position. There's some studs there. The first 5 picks might have 2 edge rushers. And at 14, they can take another one of those. Maybe an offensive lineman I've seen in some mock drafts as well, but I think they go edge rusher at 14. All right, at Irk Doubt, he says, Dynasty, what should I do with Kamara? Interesting question, very interesting question, because a lot of people play Dynasty in different ways. A lot of people's windows are different, but RB10 overall in 12 games, but he averaged 18 fantasy points, which was tied for the 7th most for the running back position. He had a career high in rushing attempts, which was interesting because we profile Kamara is an all-around running back, but we identify him as a massive pass catcher, right? 81 plus receptions since 2017, but besides this year, he missed some time and some things changed a bit though. For Dynasty though, I think again it depends on the state of your team. If you are a big contender right now, and maybe you just won and you're like, hey, I'm going to run it back this year, or, I came in 2nd or 3rd and I truly feel like my team can take the ship next season. Maybe you just hold if you're asking what to do with Kamara if you have him. Otherwise, if you're somewhere in the middle or, you're rebuilding a little bit, could I work a deal to get a J.K. Dobbins? Can I trade up in a deal to go and get DeAndre Swift? Can I trade for Mark Andrews or Kyle Pitts in a deal that I work out with the other manager? Can I target Debo? I feel like using Kamara as a very useful asset right now is a good strategy if you are rebuilding or somewhere in the middle of your league, as far as competitiveness goes, because he's 26. He's not like 30, but as the years go on, his value will get less and less and less. And I still think he'll be a great asset to have in this coming season, probably for 2 seasons. So again, state of your fantasy team, where you are at in your league. And if not, then again, I might go target one of those guys that I just mentioned in a deal to maybe somebody who feels better about their team and really wants a piece that'll push them over the edge of their fantasy venture for a ship. All right, at 10, let me do asks, Brady was dropped in a FFPC Superflex league. How early would you pick him in the rookie/free agent draft? So how this works is in some leagues, the waiver wire is closed in the offseason. So when you draft in your rookie draft, you can draft rookies or free agents from the waiver wire. So that's what is happening in this league. There's a guy who dropped Brady. So come rookie draft, some people can either draft a rookie or draft a free agent. And he's asking like, hey, if Brady's out there, should I go and draft him? And he obviously shouldn't be available in a super flex league, but we didn't know that Tom Brady was going to be coming back. What would I do? So the longevity of the dynasty asset of Tom Brady is in question here. He still led the league, though, in passing yards, passing touchdowns this past season. So we haven't seen this big decline yet. He's back in an offense with most of the pieces he had last season, as well. So it's not like we're seeing Tom Brady, start going from the top of those passing statistics to start going downwards, and now he's in the middle of the pack. Now he's losing some juice in his arm. He was arguably the MVP last season. He wasn't, but he could have been. I think, though, I'm not gonna take him over a first right now in a dynasty superflex unless I'm like completely desperate where I don't have a starting quarterback, and we don't know if the guy, the likes of Malik Willis, Desmond Ridder, and Kenny Pickett, and Sam Howell, and Corral. We can go down the list. If any of those guys will be starters this coming season. So if you're, dead for broke for a quarterback, then maybe you think about it. But even if, that was the case, I might not touch him unless it's like the very end of the first round. But I would say after the 201, I'd be fine taking Tom Brady in a super flex league, because again, I think it's hard to trade for quarterbacks. I think that it's a very, very important piece of your fantasy team in super flex leagues, and seeing the season he just had, I don't see a big decline in his place. So he is a value. It's just, do you take Tom Brady over, a Drake London or Treylon Burks or even a Malik Willis? Probably not, because, the longevity of those pieces in your dynasty leagues are very different. All right. At FF Tyler O, he asks, favorite players in the 4th round of rookie drafts. So could be a tough question, because we're not entirely sure who's going to draft. Who's going to fall in your rookie drafts. I think it will be dependent on the actual NFL draft. But I looked at my guy Duchesne's Superflex rookie ADP spreadsheets. You can find that on his Twitter page. It's in his bio. He has like a link tree. He plotted out the ADP, so average draft position of the rookie class. So where are these guys going in rookie drafts or in drafts in general? So I looked at Pierre Strong, 5'11", 202 running back from South Dakota State. He ran a 4.37. He had a good performance in his bowl game. He had a solid combine, 3 seasons above 1,000 rushing yards, 1,673 this past season with 18 rushing touchdowns. He also had 43 receptions in his last 2 seasons. So more of a radar sort of guy, taking a shot at a running back who, might fall into a position where somebody gets banged up and now he's getting some more touches. Again, Pierre Strong, South Dakota State, in Duchesne's ADP, he was going at the 402, so he fits this question. We know running backs are another tough position to trade for, and we saw guys like Elijah Mitchell get drafted super late in rookie drafts, and then he ends up being a starter. So we've seen it before. Pierre Strong is a radar guy to keep your eye on in this coming NFL draft. At JC Benoit asks, Dynasty, JT or Najee plus 112 plus late 2023 first. Interesting question. So, if you want to pay for JT, I think this is an example, because I feel like we see too often trade offers for Jonathan Taylor, who was the RB1 this past season. He was phenomenal. It's like one solid piece and a couple okay pieces. That's what I get. I put Jonathan Taylor on the block in a home dynasty league, and I'm serious about it. I'm like, hey, I'm shopping him. Like, let's talk. And the offers I get, are typically like one solid piece plus like a late first plus like an okay wide receiver I probably won't play. So I feel like this is paying for Jonathan Taylor, because if you see Najee Harris as a top 3, top 5 running back, I think this is interesting, because the 112, depending on the type of league, if it's a dynasty super flex, then that weighs a little bit more than a one quarterback league. But having that 2023 first within this, I think, makes it very interesting. Saying it's late, I think we kind of got to get away from that, because we don't really know what is going to happen in the coming season. There's guys in my dynasty leagues where they came into the season looking like a major contender, and they had a bunch of injuries, and then they fell off, and then they had an earlier first for this coming class than they expected. So you can't really project a 2023 first right now, because you don't know what's going to happen in your dynasty league. But a lot of people regard this class very highly. So if that 2023 first becomes like a top 3 pick, then you're looking at that later and saying, wow, that was a steal that, I got Najee and a 2023, earlier mid first to get Taylor. Plus I drafted somebody at the 112. So I'm actually going to lean, surprise, but I'm going to lean the Najee Harris side, because again, I have him as a top 5 running back in dynasty, as well as Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor is the 101 for most people, including myself, for the running back position. But seeing that I'm getting 2 firsts with it, I feel like that's worth it, especially if it's going to fill my team for the better later on. At Case Corbett asks, how do you view Rondale Moore going into sophomore season? Think Arizona adds a wide receiver in the draft? I was offered 110 in a 1-quarterback dynasty league. So, interesting question. Some games with decent targets and volume from Kyler. He had 3 games of 14-plus fantasy points, but he had 10 games under 8 fantasy points. I feel like I'm going to have a lot of butts in this. He had 1 big receiving day of 114 receiving yards, but he had 9 games under 30 receiving yards. So 9 games under 30 receiving yards. He had some games with a few carries, which, I think people hoped that he was going to be utilized more in that aspect of the game and be this big gadget guy like a Debo or something along those lines. Could he be better in 2022? Maybe. But what do you project him to end up being for fantasy? Because I struggle to view Rondale Moore as a guy that, I'll be comfortable one day being my wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2. I feel like he is capable of being a flex play, as long as his volume is consistent and that offense, in terms of targets, and as long as the receiving yard days are better than, under 30, like we've seen this past season with the low average depth of his targets. I look for categories for wide receivers, high target volume, potential for, a good amount of touchdowns, high receiving yards. So I think I'd take the pick, just because I don't see him hitting those categories. I just see him as a flex play, and I don't see him really going beyond that, just because I don't see the upside. And I could be wrong, and if I am, just like always, I'll say, hey, I was wrong here. I apologize. I just am struggling to see the upside that he's going to bring for Arizona, in all honesty. Toronto FF8, my guy Dave, what time is sleeping in for you? So, quick personal question, but every day I get up at 4:30 during the week for the most part, unless I take my daughter to daycare. Then I can get up at 5:30. So a day of sleeping in during the week, like today, we're home together because her daycare is closed. I think I got up at 6. On the weekends, if I can sleep till 6 or 7, that's sleeping in for me, just because I get up early every day, 4:30, go to the gym, start my day, and then I'm at my office before 7 o'clock in the morning. So that's just how that rolls for me. different than it used to be, I guess. But next question, I think we got two more. At Cali King 49er17 asks, any mid-round linebackers or safety backer tweeners you like? So I play in an IDP league. I love IDP, which is a fantasy league where you have defensive players. So I am interested in the coming class as far as the defensive players go, but I'm not going to BS you. I'm not, well researched in that aspect of the game. One guy I do have some interest in is Leo Chanel from Wisconsin, linebacker. I've seen some Luke Kuechly comps, who was a great linebacker for the Panthers. What I've seen is that he's an all-around linebacker. He stops the run, great at pressures. He reads the game well. He's got solid athleticism. A lot of people regard him as a top 3 linebacker in this class. I've seen some people put him as a linebacker 1. I think he's going to end up going 2nd or 3rd round in the draft, I think. But he's a guy, Leo Chanel, that I've had some interest in through doing some mock drafts and then reading up on some of the defensive players in this class. A Big Ten guy, again, who I think could be a force in the NFL just because he seems to have some all-around abilities and is very athletic. So Leo Chanel will be my pick for that question. And the next question, I'm going to try to get it on the board here, but it's from Good Old Boys. Let's see if I can get it there. They ask, David Bell Dynasty Outlook. So David Bell, another guy from this coming NFL draft class. So David Bell, 6'1", 212-pound wide receiver out of Purdue. Good college career. 86 receptions his freshman year, which just tells you that he was coming in and playing right away. 93 catches for 1,286 receiving yards and 6 touchdowns this past season. Very productive, but the major question is his athleticism. He ran a 4.65 40. I think that's been the big question mark for him is, can he be productive in the NFL in the same sense he was in college at Purdue, knowing that he's not the most athletic guy out of this draft class? So we'll see where he goes in the draft. I think if he goes day 2, that'll help his stock a bit. Looking at the Devi Royale prospect guide, shout out to them. They did a great job with that. I check that out all the time, but they comped him to Tyler Boyd, who I'm a huge fan of. So that's a David Bell comp that I've seen. Again, not sure where he goes in the NFL draft. I feel like in the future he'll be like a wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3 for his NFL team, which could mean, flex potential. But again, could be wrong there. But again, just juggling the, production of receptions, receiving yards, solid piece for Purdue, very important for his team versus his athleticism. So he'll be an interesting guy. I know a lot of people are pretty high on him. And I had a buddy who told me, at a bar one time, like, hey, David Bell is the guy to look at. And I was like, all right, sounds good. Last question. If I can get it up on the screen here. So at MJ Texas Forever, he asks, which of the rookies or second-year players make the biggest jump in production this next season? So interesting question, pretty open-ended. We can go down a rabbit hole of talking rookies, a rabbit hole of talking sophomores, guys that just played. So I think the important piece here is taking the biggest jump in production. So guys that balled out, Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, their first year, how big of a jump can they have? So I'll probably stay away from those guys. Now I got Coach Craig in the comments. Appreciate your question. I think it was the first one that I answered today. But he is into David Bell. He likes Leo Chanel as well. And hopefully I'm saying that right. All right. So for this last question here, who takes the biggest jump? It's got to be a big difference between rookie year versus sophomore year. I'm gonna take a look just at the sophomores because the rookie class we've been talking about enough and a lot on this podcast. But Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, I don't think they're going to take a huge jump in production because they were awesome their first year for fantasy. Devonta Smith's a guy that had some solid games this past season. I think he was scoring in like the 19-point range for fantasy for PPR. Then he had a bunch of down games as well. So could he take a big leap? He was regarded as the wide receiver 2 by, I would say, most people in this last draft class. Elijah Moore, I talk about all the time. We saw massive production out of him. He has the full opportunity to be the wide receiver 1 for the Jets with Zach Wilson in this coming season. So a full season out of Elijah Moore being in that role that we saw him explode in for those handful of weeks, I think he can take that massive jump as well. If the Jets don't draft, a Breece Hall, can Michael Carter take a step in the right direction? We saw some nice games out of him. He'd be interesting too. Just go down that class. Can one of the quarterbacks step up? Justin Fields, I was super into this offseason. I still am. High rushing upside. He's a good passer. Hopefully they add more weapons to him, but down year is rookie year. Same as T-Law, Trevor Lawrence we talked about before. Trey Lance was not the starter. Does Trey Lance become the starter? A lot of guys have the full potential to take a big jump in this coming season, which will be interesting for sure. So if you guys asked a question or tuned into this podcast, really appreciate it. On TikTok, so I took over the Fantasy Points TikTok and just kind of like shifted it into being my from the TikTok page that I was operating before. But I'm going on a live stream tomorrow, 8 p.m. Central with Dynasty Dork. So if you are on TikTok or if you're not, sign up and you can check us out there. Should be a fun episode talking about the incoming class and some other mailbag episodes as well. Otherwise, random content, as you know, throughout the week. Appreciate you guys tuning in today, and we are getting closer and closer to that NFL draft that is going to shake the fantasy world. So have a good one, guys. Happy Monday. Enjoy the week. Enjoy the basketball games going on, and talk to you guys soon.